Good morning. When I was in about 7th grade, the girls used to gossip about each other. Who had big boobs? Who stuffed their bra with tissues? Who was so flat-chested as to be completely hopeless? The girls wore tight sweaters and secretly looked at the boys to see if the boys were looking at them. Not me. Once I began developing breasts, I had a very uneasy relationship with my own body. I wore baggy shirts and slouched my shoulders to hide my developing form. Even into young adulthood, I was embarrassed and ashamed about my breasts. They were too floppy, too uneven, not round enough, not perky enough. Although the teen years can be particularly hard when it comes to how we look, I think even as adults, we can be our own worst critics. When I was in seminary, I became good friends with a classmate. Early in our relationship, as we were still getting to know each other, we went out to dinner. We put in our order and then sat chatting in the booth waiting for our meal to arrive. There was a pause in the conversation, and my friend leaned across the table and stroked my cheek. "You're hairy," she said, and I almost died on the spot. I froze, my mind racing, frantically casting about for how to respond. Then she said, "I've got bumps." She stroked her own cheek. I noticed that indeed she did have bumps, rather than the silky smooth skin our magazine ads tell us that all women should have. I recall the incident with amusement now, thinking back on how panicked I was to have been called out on my body hair, a legacy of my Spanish heritage on my mother's side. Her comment brought back the shame from my younger years when I was bullied in gym class for not having started shaving my legs yet. And yet for my buddy, it was a simple observation, delivered without judgment. Some people are hairier than others. Some people have bumps. We make all sorts of judgments about our bodies. Too fat, too thin, too pale, too dark, too tall, not tall enough, too wrinkled, too saggy, too weak. Especially as we age or after we have children, or when we become injured or more sedentary and spend less time in motion, our bodies may change in ways that we don't like. Gravity takes a toll. Muscle tone is lost. We may develop a bit of a paunch or a turkey neck, or that flabby part that hangs behind the arms. I hear recognition. Sometimes it seems like aging is one long, ongoing adjustment to the changes in the body. How can we let go of the judgment? I think it's interesting to consider that our body is both part of who we are and also not exactly who we are, but more like where we live. When I worked in the hospital, I encountered people who had had a limb amputated. We hear about this too when soldiers are injured in war or from horrific industrial accidents. But generally speaking, a person doesn't feel like they aren't them anymore. They may be sad or angry that they've lost function. Their image of themselves might have changed, but they're still them. I've thought about what it would be like to have a leg amputated. Would I still be me? What if it were both legs? Or what if I became paralyzed? I'm pretty sure I wouldn't like it, the loss of independence and lifestyle, but I think I'd still be me. Someone said, "You are just a ghost driving a meat-covered skeleton." A view that sees the essential part of the self as residing in the body, but not primarily being the body. Some might resonate with that view spiritually. Many consider the body to be the shell for our spirit, or essence, or spark of life, all those words that the song talked about. Philosophers and theologians have referred to the body as the seat of the soul. Now, if words like ghost or spirit or soul don't fit with your theology, perhaps a later modification of the quote from a more humanist standpoint might resonate. I'm just a brain driving a meat suit around life. Our emotions, our personality, our sense of self all come from the brain. When we have a brain injury or a brain tumor, or we see ourselves slipping into the early stages of dementia, we can feel like we're losing who we are. So if who we are at the core is not our body, then why should our bodies, or the changes that come with age or wear or injury, make us feel bad about ourselves? As for me, the event that helped me let go of my embarrassment over my body was attending the Michigan Women's Music Festival when I was in my mid-20s. It was a week-long outdoor music festival for women and girls only in northern Michigan. The year I went, the festival was attended by about 8,000 women. There was a stage where performers would play, fields and woods for setting up tents, ice-cold showers that I think must have been glacier-fed or something, and an outdoor market where you could get everything from books to crafts to musical instruments to junk food. Because it was women only and a free and liberating atmosphere, or perhaps because it was in the 80s or in the middle of nowhere, it seemed to be that clothing was optional. Many women went topless. Many wore only sneakers, or perhaps just a hat to keep the sun out of their eyes. By the end of that first day, I had probably seen 5,000 women naked. There's nothing like 5,000 bodies to put your own physique into perspective. Bodies come in every color, every shape, every size. They take up the space they take up. They move with grace or not, or they move with difficulty. They have lots of hair or little hair. They are wrinkled or smooth. They have scars and stretch marks. They are athletic or dumpy. Some are pregnant. Seeing the great diversity in women's bodies was a spiritual experience for me. It's where I learned to accept my own physical self. I am not more or less. I am simply one of a great variety in the beautiful diversity of humankind. Interestingly, I was not the only one who had that epiphany. When I read about the festival on Wikipedia, I was trying to refresh my memory about it. I found this quote by musician and kitchen volunteer Gretchen Phillips, who said, "I had never seen so many breasts before, so many bare asses, so much damn skin on such a vast terrain. I decided to make that weekend all about studying my body issues." Although I wasn't actively studying my body issues, the festival did produce a shift in my thinking. There was nothing like seeing people of every size and shape to help me understand that I was one particularity in a sea of difference, and there's nothing about me that stands out as beyond the norm. It also helps me to recognize that the imperfections I see so magnified in myself are not noticed, or at least not given that kind of weight by others. Last summer, I put myself into a bathing suit for the first time in over a decade. I was at a conference in Houston, and our hotel had a river pool on the roof. It was in the shape of the outline of Texas, of course, with water jets creating a flow that could let you bob around the circle with minimal effort while chatting with your friends or enjoying a beverage. A group of chaplain colleagues, mostly younger and fitter than me, invited me to go swimming with them. Now, I'd like to think that if anyone is going to refrain from being judgmental, it's a group of chaplains. And yet, this pesky tendency to fret about how I look raised its ugly head. I worried about being on the far side of middle age and being seen as dumpy. Then I remembered all the times that I had been at a pool or been at the beach, and the types of people that I had seen. This is when I was younger, and there were all kinds of people there. Some were young, some were old, some were fat, some were thin. I didn't give it a second thought. I suspect that most people don't, except maybe children. When I was a child, I remember being intrigued by the jiggly skin of my grandfather's turkey neck. The neck, by the way, that I see the start of when I look in my own mirror. But I loved it on my grandfather because it was part of him, and I loved him. I remember my dad joking about his beer gut. He said his stomach was so big and his hips were so narrow, he had to wear a belt or his stomach would pry his pants off. When I rode behind him on the motorcycle, I could barely get my arms around his middle. And I remember feeling the muscles work under the fat when he shifted gears. I didn't have any judgment about it as a child. My mother was skinny, my dad had a big stomach. It was just part of who they were. I see that same acceptance with our family's next generation. When my niece was young, she came up to me and started playing with the skin tags on my neck. I was self-conscious of them, and while I was trying to figure out how to respond to this invasion of my space, she brightly said, "I like these." Like my grandfather's wattle, I can only imagine she liked them because they were part of me and she liked me. She has a family of her own now, and at 18 months, my grandniece is a total joy. At a recent dinner with family, the baby was on my lap, and she repeatedly poked me here above the lip. It took me a minute to realize she was touching my mole, and I was struck by the innocence of the exploration. Aha! A bump on Granty Kim's face. Thinking about these memories reminds me of my own childhood and visiting the older couple who lived next door. They were retired and spent a lot of time traveling, and Mrs. May was deeply tanned. She also had numerous little dark bumps or moles on her face. She looked different from everyone else I knew, and I loved those dark little bumps. I thought they made her look exotic. It never occurred to me to judge her or to wonder if she was self-conscious about them. I loved them because I loved her. I loved her face because I loved her. And ultimately, it goes back to what I learned from my seminary friend. Some people are hairy. Some have bumps. When we are inclined to judge ourselves harshly for some physical attribute, it helps remembering that we are more than just our body. Who we really are is what's inside. The body is just how we move through the world, and it's going to change over time. We might remember that we are much more focused on our perceived flaws than anyone else around us, who might not even notice the things that cause us such dismay. And regardless, we can remember that any characteristic that we have is part of the great diversity in humanity, that we are no more an outlier than anyone else. And finally, let us remember that the children in our lives who they love our warts, our bumps, our flab, our waddles, because they love us, and these things are part of us. When I was a student in chaplaincy, I led a reflection from my peer group where I showed a montage of a variety of pictures of dogs. There was the tall, thin whippet, every rib and vertebra showing. There were the pit bull and the Rottweiler, thick, big-boned, muscular dogs. There were energetic puppies and old dogs with white muzzles. There was a dog with one eye, one with 3 legs. There was a fat beagle and a splotchy mutt that looked like it couldn't figure out what color it was. I asked the group whether these dogs were cute or ugly, whether any seemed better than the others, more loving or more worthy of being loved. The group thought all the dogs were cute, all were loving, all were worthy. I pointed out that it was the same with people. Tall, short, fat, thin, muscular, or slight. We are all worthy. We all have our own beauty. We just need to look at ourselves the way we look at those dogs, or maybe the way our dogs and our children look at us. Our attributes need not be a cause of embarrassment or shame. Our physical differences do not make us better or worse than anyone else. Most people have warts of one sort or another. Just as we accept those around us, we can learn to accept ourselves, warts and all. May it be so.
All right.
Thank you.